Hey there, everyone. So I decided to post this additional video for this particular week just so that I could take some of the content that I was going to present in lecture and put it in a format, in a video format, so that when we get together next Wednesday, we can spend that time doing mainly interactive activities. I thought that'd be more interesting. It would give more time for some of the great questions that y'all have been asking. So that's what I decided to do. So most of the material that I'm going to be talking about here is stuff that I normally would have just presented in a lecture format, but I think we'll do it this way. I think it'd be more efficient and more effective and would be just better for learning overall. So there you go. So I'm going to dive right into it. I'm going to start kind of where I left off on last Wednesday's class, where I presented kind of this summary of the general characteristics of conflict. And once again, I kind of said that, we need to remember that conflict is inevitable. We're alive, we're unique, and we all live in limitations, right? So conflict is an inevitable thing. Uh, Conflict, while it can be overwhelming in a lot of cases, and obviously it can causes stress and a lot of kind of negative feelings, but it can also be used to transform, to change how we see ourselves, how we think, to expand our own capacities, to improve our relationships, to improve communities and institutions, societies, and the world overall. This being said, conflict is also really complex and highly relative, which is really why it's somewhat impossible to say that there's one formula for dealing with conflict that is applicable in all cases, right? It depends upon the situation. What are the issues involved? Who are the parties involved? What setting is the conflict occurring in? There's so many different factors to consider. So conflict is really complex and highly relative depending upon the situation. Also, I talked about how conflict occurs at all levels of social interaction and within the self. So conflicts within the self are again intra personal conflicts. That's conflict within the self. Then we can talk about micro level interpersonal conflict between people in small groups, between small groups. We can talk about meso level conflict, conflicts within sort of societies, within communities, within institutions. And lastly, we can talk about macro level conflict, so global conflict, international conflict. So conflict occurs across all these different levels, and it occurs within the self. And one of the reasons why conflict resolution studies exists as a discipline in and of itself is this understanding among scholars that there's certain aspects of conflict, certain characteristics of conflict, features of conflict that transcend these different levels and these different sort of ways in which conflict can manifest. There's some similarities between conflict between two individuals and conflict between two countries. There are some similar things, similar dynamics, similar components that we can identify across all these different types of conflict. Number six, I said, conflict manifests in many different ways. It can cause extreme harm, be characterized by violence and polarization, the creation of enemies, or it can manifest in ways that are characterized by collaboration and more constructive engagement and non-harming and non-violent behaviors and approaches. And this kind of relates to this idea that conflict has both a positive and negative potential. Yes, conflict can cause harm and often doesn't feel too good, but it also has many sort of positive aspects and can lead to many positive things. Again, growth in oneself, within one's relationship, important forms of relationship and institutional and societal change. So positive and negative. And again, I reiterated this idea that so because of those characteristics, that means that in conflict resolution studies, we try to build our capacities as conflict workers, build the ways in which we go about managing and dealing with conflict in our own lives, and the ways in which we go about working with others to help them address their conflict. We also try to learn how to read conflict, right? To be able to look at a conflict situation and to be able to say, I think I kind of know what's going on, and to know how to read it and know how to go about finding out more information about a conflict, so that we can analyze it. And then after while reading the conflict, we also reflect upon ourselves and kind of our relationship to that conflict. And then this is all kind of part of learning how to respond in competent ways, to be able to respond to a conflict in a way that's both effective, right? That achieves what we're trying to do, but that also kind of reduces harm and works to maintain relationships and the dignity of the different parties involved. And lastly, this kind of all is summed up in our efforts to try to minimize or prevent destructive conflict, and while also promoting or maximizing constructive conflict. So again, you're trying to minimize the destructive or the negative or the dysfunctional aspects of conflict, while trying to maximize the positive, the functional, the constructive aspects of conflict. And there was a good question in last class about the definitions of destructive versus constructive conflict. So I'll kind of present sort of like some working definitions right now, just to help kind of clarify and help orient you in terms of how we go about defining destructive and constructive conflict. Right now I'll say, destructive conflict is conflict which causes harm, conflict which erodes relationships, causes hurt feelings, causes negative behaviors and negative perceptions between the parties involved, as well as conflict that results in suboptimal outcomes. So destructive conflict results in outcomes, in resolutions to a conflict that are just not as good as they could be, right? Sometimes they're really, really bad, really negative outcomes, but it can also be just conflicts that are, approaches to solving the conflict that just isn't as good as it could be. Doesn't achieve what could be achieved if more sort of integrative and creative approaches have been used. So destructive conflict causes harm, erodes relationships, and results in suboptimal outcomes. The flip side, at kind of the other end of that spectrum, because really we're talking about a spectrum of conflict, because there's really no conflict that, or very few conflicts that you could say are absolutely destructive or absolutely constructive. So at the other end of that spectrum, we can talk about constructive conflict as that which avoids or minimizes harm, which maintains or improves relationships between different parties, and that results in optimal outcomes. That is, outcomes that are creative and mutually satisfactory to the parties that are involved. So again, constructive conflict is conflict which either completely avoids or minimizes harm that is caused by the conflict. It's conflict which in the end will maintain or improves the relationships between the different parties, and is conflict that results in the best possible solutions given the situation, right? Usually these are solutions which are creative and mutually satisfactory. Again, the best possible solution. So again, I say that these are kind of two kind of working definitions to help orient you in terms of how we can go about identifying constructive conflicts and destructive conflicts. And again, as I said, these things are more, it's like on a continuum of destructive versus constructive. And most conflicts exist somewhere on that continuum between these two poles of destructive and constructive. So it's not really about saying, oh, this conflict is completely destructive, because most conflicts have some elements of both. And it's about sort of, again, figuring out where is this conflict on this continuum between destructive and constructive. And as conflict workers, how we go about sort of sliding a conflict away from that destructive end of the spectrum and towards that constructive end of the spectrum. And appreciating the fact that all we're trying to do is slide it further in the constructive direction. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get a perfectly constructive conflict, because again, we don't have total control and situations are really complex. But again, we're trying to move conflict towards that constructive pole, to improve the way things are occurring, to improve the potential outcomes. For more information on destructive versus constructive, there's the other video that I posted on Nexus, as well as these two handouts. These are the video, and these two handouts are under week 2. This one handout is a summary that I did up based upon some info from a different textbook, which gives some of the more specific characteristics of constructive versus destructive conflict. And you can see There's certain things, like if you look at that last box, consequences slash outcomes, that's kind of that optimal versus suboptimal outcome. So, constructive conflict, reward of successfully facing a challenge, learning more about another's needs and feelings, strengthening relationships, providing a safe outlet for the feelings and frustrations, things that are bound to occur in a relationship. And with destructive conflict, consequences, outcomes, no one is likely to get what they want. It can threaten the future of the relationship. So that's another way of saying constructive conflict, you're achieving the most optimal outcome, and destructive conflict, or a destructive conflict will result in a suboptimal outcome. And I do kind of offer other working definitions as well. If you look at the very top one, under constructive conflict, I've got achieve the best possible outcome and strengthen the relationship, or at least do not harm the relationship. And under destructive conflict, I've got outcomes fall short of what is possible and have a damaging effect on the relationship. Okay. The other thing that you might want to take a look at again is the conflict polarity analysis. That's the thing in the bottom corner over here, which is actually a tool that I developed that we're going to use in class to sort of figure out where conflict sits on these different kind of spectrums of constructive versus destructive. Okay, so that's some stuff you can look at for more information. Right, so the focus of this video, kind of moving on, is to think about a definition of conflict. I've given characteristics of conflict, but I haven't defined conflict. And we're going to start with the textbook definition. And again, this is the one from Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot, which is your course textbook. And they define conflict as an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. And this definition is found on page 3. You will notice that I am also, the way I cited this is I'm citing this as a block quotation using proper APA format, which is why you can see I've got after goals, there's a period, and then I put bracket P.3 with a block quotation, which is a longer quotation in your writing. Your citation in parentheses will come after the period. Okay, if you're just doing shorter quotations within your text, the period comes after your citation. We'll talk about that in the future, but this is an example of a block quotation. Anyways, I'll say it again. Conflict, Berry, and Wilmot say that conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. This is their definition. This definition includes kind of 4 main characteristics of conflict, which again, Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot suggest are defining features of conflict, as in these are things which are always present with conflict. And I'm going to go through each of those. These are obviously expressed struggle, interdependence, perceived incompatible goals and scarce resources, and interference. So what do Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot mean when they say conflict is an expressed struggle? They say that conflict exists when every person's perception of the struggle is communicated in some form. They say that in order for a conflict to be a conflict, there has to be some form of communication of the fact that they perceive that a conflict exists. This can be saying something, some kind of confrontation, where you bring the issue to the other person's attention or the other party's attention. Or it could be things even like active avoidance. If you're actively avoiding another party, and that's how you're choosing to communicate that there's some kind of an issue or a conflict here, that would also be considered sort of a manifestation of this expressed struggle. Okay? But the idea is there has to be some kind of behavior is communicated where the parties involved say, there's a conflict here. Okay? Or you might say there's a problem here or an issue here. There's something not right here. Something has to be communicated. And Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot, they quote another source. So they quote an author by Jand, where they say that, conflict occurs, in order for conflict to occur, the parties involved have to agree in some way that the behaviors associated with their relationship are labeled as conflict behavior. So again, the suggestion here is that in order for a conflict to be a conflict, the parties involved have to agree, whether it's overtly spoken or not, that something's wrong, that there is a conflict present. And just another sort of like citation tip, you'll see the quotation from Jant, agree in some way, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is how you correctly cite a quotation within a different source. So in this particular quotation, Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot, they were quoting the author Jant, and they included that quotation in their book. So to do that, you can see I've got it in quotation marks, agree in some way that the behaviors associated with the relationship are labeled as conflict behavior. And then my citation format is bracket Jant, comma, 1973, comma, page 2. So that's where that quotation was in the source by Jant. And then you say, as cited in Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot, comma, 2022, comma, page 3, which is where you find that quotation in this this book. Okay, so again, we'll go over this, but this is an example of how you would cite a quotation within another source. Okay. If these words were from Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot, it would just say Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot 2022, page 3. But because Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot are actually pulling from another scholar, you have to include that original scholar along with the source in which you got it from. Okay. Again, that's a little APA citation aside. But again, I'll go back to my main point here. Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot say that conflict, in order to be a conflict, must be an expressed struggle. There's lots of different ways in which you can express that struggle, they say, but there has to be some communication of that perception to the other party. And there has to be some kind of tacit or even unspoken agreement between the parties that the behaviors in which they're demonstrating are conflict behaviors. Number one. That's number one. Number two. Hawker, Berry, and Wilmot say that conflict occurs when there is interdependence between the parties. So what they mean by this is that there's some measure of mutual dependence and impact between the two parties, even if it's temporary and very minor. So effectively, there's some, within a conflict situation, to a limited extent, to a limited extent or a great extent, depending on the situation, those parties impact each other, and they're somewhat dependent upon each other. They argue that if there was no dependency between those two parties, there wouldn't be a conflict because you could just very easily disconnect and walk away, right? That issue wouldn't exist. And if anything, that situation of conflict creates dependency, because you become impacted by and shaped by how the other party reacts to the conflict in that situation. So conflict, they argue, is always characterized by some form of interdependence. So we look at this image here, you've got, two characters that are they're clearly having mutual impact. One yells, the other one yells, the other one yells, the other one yells. They yell because that person's yelling, and so then that person yells back, and then they yell. There's mutual impact, and also there's mutual dependency in that relationship, in that they're engaging with each other regarding the same issue. So there's some kind of connection. There's some form of interdependence, or you could say mutual dependency between them. And again, this can happen even if that interdependence and impact is very limited and very short. If you're, say, going to park somewhere and someone takes your parking spot, even though you don't know that person, there's no pre-existing relationship, there's still mutual dependency there because they took your spot, you needed that spot, you were dependent upon them not taking your spot in order for you to get it, right? So there's still, even in that kind of flash moment, there's still a little bit of mutual dependency and obviously impact. What they did impacts what you did. And then if you get out, you start yelling at them, then you impact them, etc. Right? So this idea of interdependence. The third characteristic, Huckleberry and Wilmot say that conflict is characterized by perceived incompatible goals or scarce resources. Basically, in conflict, the parties that are involved believe that their goals, what they're seeking to achieve, are somehow incompatible. So effectively, one party says, if they win, if they get what they want, I lose, right? It's a win, it's perceived as a win-lose situation. If they get what they want, I don't get what I want. And if I get what I want, they don't get what they want, right? So it's a perceived incompatible goals. And, or the parties might perceive that the resources they are in conflict over are in limited supply. So, let's say it's conflict over a thing, like say like a pie, right? There's conflict over a pie. Obviously, there's a limited amount of pie there, right? So if I get pie, for every piece of pie I eat, that's a piece of pie you don't get to eat, right? There's the resources that we're in conflict over are in limited supply. Okay, so this is equally applicable to both tangible things like pies and intangible stuff like friends or power or influence. Right? If we perceive that power within a relationship or power within a workplace, for example, if this is limited, this perception of limited resources can be seen as can be sort of a basis for conflict. Same thing, in terms of like friendships and relationships, that could be a resource that people are in conflict over. Um, I don't know. See if you can think about other things out there. What other sort of like intangible stuff might people be in conflict over? There's lots of different things, intangible things, influence, power, information, maybe. I don't know. Okay, so they say that again, conflict occurs when there's perceived incompatible goals or scarce resources. And I'm clumping those two things under one sort of characteristic of conflict. One challenge I'll put to this is this word perceived incompatible goals and scarce resources, because there are conflicts where actually there is incompatibility, or actually there is scarcity, right? And that reality of that incompatibility or scarcity needs to be considered. It might not just be that the parties are perceiving that there's conflict there and there's scarcity there. There might actually be some scarcity there. We did the conflict over the orange in class, right? And the brilliant and like ultimate creative transformative suggestion is, oh, you take the seeds and you plant a tree, right? That is obviously the ideal thing there, right? Because then you're literally like not expanding the pie, but expanding the orange in terms of making more oranges, right? However, we live in a world where seedless oranges exist. Sometimes resources are scarce, and we need to consider that as well. So I'll, if I were to edit this, I'd say, perceived or actual incompatible goals and or scarce resources. Okay, but that's number 3. Last one. Huckleberry and Wilmot say that conflict is characterized by interference. And this goes back to the previous point, so that each party believes that the presence of another person interferes with their desired actions. And this is on page 9. So basically, each party believes that the other party is blocking their goals or taking their resources. They are blocking my goals and or taking my resources. I want the pie. They are getting in my way. They prevent me from getting that pie. They are interfering with my ability to do what I want, achieve my goals, get the resources that I want. They're getting in the way. They interfere with it, right? So that's the fourth characteristic, and again, that goes back to this idea of this previous point, right? Perceived incompatible goals or scarce resources, because there's this perception that things are actually incompatible or scarce, and there becomes a win-lose situation. That means that They believe that the other party interferes with their own capacity to get access to achieve access to what they need to achieve their goals, the resources they need, etc. So the other party interferes with them. All right, so to summarize, Huckleberry and Wilmot offer this definition of conflict, and they say that conflict has four defining features. Features. That means that these are things that define conflict. What conflict is? The phenomenon of conflict is characterized by these four things in all instances. That's their argument. They say it must include an expressed struggle. It must be an expressed struggle between interdependent parties who perceive or actually have incompatible goals and scarce resources. And there must be some perception or actuality. One party is interfering with the other in their attempt to achieve those goals, or it's kind of a mutual interference. They're getting in my way, and the other party says they're getting in my way. As I mentioned briefly in class, I'm not a big fan of this particular definition. It's good ideas, but I think there's at least, and definitely at least one of these four characteristics that should not be included in the definition of conflict. One of these four characteristics, express struggle, interdependent parties, perceived incompatible goals and scarce resources, for interference, one of those should not be part of the definition of conflict. It might be something that often happens in conflict, but it doesn't always happen in conflict. So which one do you think, I think, does not belong? Take a second and to yourself kind of think through this a little bit. See if you can sort of pick which one you think doesn't belong. When we get together in class next Wednesday, we'll actually do this in a group setting. So I encourage you to pause the video for a second and just to take a guess what do you think it might be.